I'm Matt Guichard, and this is No Holds Barred. In this episode, we're going to talk about the issue of a minor and consent with respect to sexual acts with an adult. The law in the state of California is pretty clear. Minors cannot consent in a number of cases and in a number of issues, particularly with respect to sexual intercourse, sexual assaults, sex acts of any kind. And the claim on the part of an adult is that the minor consented. So I had a case in which two young girls who were 15 were truants. They had cut school a particular day, and they were out having fun, as truants do, and they were invited by an adult into his motorhome, and he had parked his motorhome close to their school. And as a matter of fact, that adult had recently gotten out of prison, having been convicted of sexual assault and kidnapping. Now, these young 15-year-old girls didn't know anything about that, but this fella invited them into his motorhome, asked them if they wanted anything to drink, and he went into a store and bought some beer for them, and then told them that he had marijuana, and he drove to his house, picked up the marijuana, and they drove back to a parking lot in a shopping center near the school, where he exposed himself to them and attempted to have sexual intercourse with one of them. The case went to trial. I tried that case, and the defense was they consented. They consented to come into his motorhome. They consented to drinking alcohol. They actually asked him for marijuana, and his attorney asked the judge to give an instruction that essentially said that since they consented to the acts, he did not commit any of the alleged acts against these children. The judge refused. And the moral of this story is, of course, they can't consent. Those 15-year-old, even though they said, yes, let's do these various things, legally, they could not consent. And we see that oftentimes, and people talk about, well, we have cases in which we call statutory rape cases. And what's a statutory rape case? Well, that is, in fact, where two individuals get together and, let's say, have sexual intercourse, but one is an adult and one is a minor. Now, a difference in the age of separation makes a difference in the charged crime, whether it's a misdemeanor, whether it's a felony. And we often picture that somebody who is 17 years old, who has an 18-year-old boyfriend, and they have sexual relations. Technically, it's a statutory rape. Technically, that's 17-year-old. But there would be very few jurisdictions that would charge that. Now, many times, the parent of the 17-year-old is the one that's pushing this. But when we have somebody who's 15 and somebody who is 30, and they have sexual relations, legally cannot consent, that is a statutory rape. It's a statutory rape because it's a consensual act, but legally the adult is responsible. And that big age gap can very well make that a felony offense. So when we go back and we think about consent to a number of things, but particularly in sex acts, a minor cannot consent in those kinds of situations, no matter what the defense is and no matter what we hear. Now, we've heard about many times in news stories about, let's say, a young girl goes online, meets somebody, becomes quite enamored, and the two of them then get together. And they travel across state lines, they travel to another state, and she wants to be with that adult. And the defense is, once they're caught, is she totally consented. In fact, she doesn't want to go back. She wants to stay with him, but legally cannot. And in fact, that could be a kidnapping, as well as all the various sex acts that occurred during the time, can all be offenses in a case such as that. So we often say, be very cautious as an adult, ensuring that somebody is of the age of consent. Now, of course, the question arises, an adult's in a bar, and there's a young woman in the bar, and the adult just assumes, well, she's obviously old enough, she's 21, obviously old enough to be here, and so they get together, and ultimately it turns that she is 17 years old. She's not even legally an adult, much less 21, old enough to. What is their consent? What would be charged? And that's a case of, you look at reasonably what is the defense and reasonably what is the perception of that particular adult. And is it reasonable that he assumed she was an adult? And I would argue, yes, it's totally reasonable that he believed she was an adult, and thus there, everything pointed to that. In fact, the one case that we had that was very similar to that, she actually had a fake ID that indicated. So for every reason, he had to believe that she was an adult, and their sexual behavior that evening, actually is when it took place, was not only consensual, but fell within the law, not outside the law, and he was not prosecuted for that particular sex act. If you enjoyed this episode, please hit the like button and hit the subscribe button. It really helps us with the YouTube algorithms. See you next time on No Holds Barred.